You'll see where we are. Behind me is one of the most iconic sites of the entire planet. Of course, we're at the White House, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. We're at the home of the leader of the executive branch of the United States government, but I would say more colloquially, probably the most powerful person in the world. There are a few people, the President of the United States, the President of Russia, the President of China, Prime Minister of India, who have the power to end the world because of their country's nuclear arsenals. That is an unprecedented, awesome power, a terrifying power, especially when these nuclear powers are in confrontation, are challenging each other, are actually in some cases in proxy wars with each other. And standing in front of the White House, it leads me to reflect on the question of power itself. How is it that so much power is concentrated in the hands of one person? When the U.S. Constitution was first promulgated in 1787, it was certainly not the idea that the world's survival would be in the hands of one or two or a handful of people, nor was it the idea at all in the United States power would be so strongly concentrated in the hands of the President of the United States. Of course, the whole concept of the presidency was something new and invented in 1787 because the new federal government was not looking for a king. The Revolutionary War of the United States had been fought on the basis of escaping the power of one-person rule, of escaping the power of monarchy. And so the Constitution aims to create a republican form of government. In fact, a republican form of government with divided powers among the three branches, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, and with checks and balances across the three branches so that no single branch predominates. For example, though the President of the United States in the Constitution is the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Armed Forces, it is Congress under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution that has the sole constitutional authority to declare war. And that raises the question, are the rules applied? Is the idea of the division of power, of checks and balances, still applicable? Well, this question of how to restrain power of powerful states is a very, very old question. It was raised famously by the Roman poet Juvenal, who famously wrote, "But who guards the guardians?" In other words, if you put the guardians over the state, who watches over the state itself? And James Madison, the father of the U.S. Constitution, raised the question explicitly in his commentary on the new draft Constitution in the Federalist Papers, specifically in Federalist number 51. Madison, as father of the Constitution, aimed to design a system of checks and balances, of division of powers along the lines as had been recommended from ancient times and as had been written by Montesquieu in the Spirit of the Laws in 1740, a kind of guide and inspiration for the founding fathers and the drafters of the Constitution. Well, Madison asked a very specific question, and he made this point about power. He said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and then in the next place, oblige it to control itself. So this puzzle, how to guard the guardians, has been with political thinkers from the time of the Greeks and the Romans and from the time of the founding fathers. In the early years of the U.S. Federal Republic, from 1789 onward, I think it's right to say that the presidency was not an all-powerful institution, and that Congress in many ways was the predominant branch of the three branches. But it's also fair to say with the rise of U.S. power to global superpower status in the 20th century, the balance of power among the three branches of government shifted decisively. That shift began in the 1930s, in the Great Depression, when a strong federal government was needed to overcome this shocking and unprecedented dislocation of economic affairs, with unemployment rising to a quarter of the population. And indeed, a strong and benevolent president took office in March 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He used the power responsibly, but he tremendously built the power of the presidency, the size of the federal government, the areas of responsibility, the government programs, including public works and other kinds of public investment, Social Security, oversight of the financial markets, and many, many other innovations of the New Deal. But this rise of executive power, of course, was amplified dramatically when the United States entered World War II on December 8, 1941, the day after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Because then there was a mass mobilization of the resources of this vast country in the government's hands to build a military, to build an industrial base that would contribute to the defeat of fascism in Germany and in Japan. By the end of World War II, the federal government was enormous. The military was enormous. The power of that military unprecedented because of the development of the atomic bomb in the course of the war by the United States in the Los Alamos Project or the Manhattan Project. So after World War II, the U.S. federal government was fundamentally reshaped. Without doubt, we had entered the age of an imperial presidency, an age in which the power of the president over the other two branches of government, the legislative and judiciary, was decisive and predominant. From that point on, the President of the United States was not only commander-in-chief of the most powerful military in the world, but in effect had the almost personal choice of war and peace on countless occasions. All of that power is reflected in a very decisive, in many ways, very unfortunate law created and passed into law in 1947, the National Security Act. That was an act that reorganized the U.S. military and created the Department of Defense, but also created an astounding instrument of presidential authority, and that is the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA was created with two parts of the House. One was as an intelligence agency to gather information about the rest of the world of significance to U.S. national security. But the other side of the CIA was operational, to be engaged as a secret, largely unaccountable, largely covert operative body at the behest of the President of the United States, almost a personal army of the President of the United States. And from 1947 onward, and in the context of the Cold War that pitted these two great rivals, the United States and the Soviet Union, against each other in an arms race and in proxy conflicts all over the world, the CIA came to be a true private army of the President of the United States, leading assassinations, coups, overthrows, insurrections in many parts of the world. One very authoritative scholarly account was able to count 64 covert regime change operations, almost all led by the CIA, between 1947 and 1989, that Cold War period. In other words, the United States government acted secretly, it acted violently, and it acted globally. And that meant that the President of the United States, as Commander-in-Chief, as a commander over the nuclear arsenal, and as commander over an archipelago of overseas military installations that today are counted at around 750 overseas military bases in no less than 80 countries. This has given extraordinary power to the president. Well, this is a great drama, I would say, for the United States and for the world today. Such a powerful military, secret army, intelligence and covert operations all over the world, a presidency that has had and taken the prerogative to launch wars of choice without the constitutional authority vested in Congress being exercised, has created a situation where the rule of law in the United States itself is obviously been stretched to the limit. Is this a republic or has it become an empire? We know from history that the founding fathers looked to the Roman Republic as the great role model for the republic that they sought to create. But we also know that the Roman Republic came to an end. It came to an end when the republican institutions were overtaken by the authority of an emperor. This is usually dated to the rise of Augustus in 27 BC and then onward, that the republican institutions led by the Senate and by the elected consuls were replaced by an emperor who commanded the military and often arose from within the ranks of the military. For the United States, this is a critical issue, and for the world, perhaps even more so. Will the United States remain a republic, or has all of the vesting of authority and military power concentrated in the hands of the President of the United States, who lives in that home behind me, already pushed the U.S. from the republic envisioned by the founding fathers into an imperial power of our age? We have to hope that the rule of law is sustained, because the rule of law, in fact, is the only way to a peaceful planet.